Maya had always known she was different from the other elves in the crystal city of Ethermore. Even as a young child with golden braids and bright eyes, she would wander into the forbidden libraries where ancient texts spoke of dragons and their bond with elves. Her tutors would scold her, but she could not stop reading about these magnificent creatures that had once filled the skies. The elven civilization had been thriving for thousands of years on the planet. Kepler 442b, they had built towering cities of crystal and silver that reached toward twin suns. They had developed technology that seemed like magic to most species in the galaxy. They had everything they needed except one thing: they had forgotten how to believe in magic. And 3 generations before Maya's birth, the elves had made a decision as a council. They decided that dragons were dangerous and unpredictable. They decided that the ancient bond between elf and dragon was a relic of a primitive past. They decided to abandon the creatures and leave them to fend for themselves on the far side of the world. Some of the last dragons had died naturally, but many had been hunted and killed by those who feared them. Maya's family was one of the oldest noble houses, but even they had accepted the council's ruling. Her mother was a respected scholar. Her father was a military commander. They wanted Maya to follow tradition, to become a guardian of the city, to take her place in their structured and orderly society. But Maya could not shake the feeling that something beautiful had been lost. When Maya turned 18 years old, she did something that shocked her entire family. She left the Crystal City and ventured into the wastelands where the ancient dragon caves were said to exist. Her parents were devastated. They called it betrayal and madness. They told her that no elf had gone to those lands in over 200 years. The journey took many weeks. Maya traveled alone through desert and through forgotten forests. She crossed rivers that glowed with bioluminescent life. She climbed mountains that touched the clouds. One night, during a terrible storm, she took shelter in a cave and found something that changed her life forever. In the deepest part of the cave was a nest containing 3 dragon eggs. They were enormous and covered in scales that shimmered between blue and silver. Maya could feel something calling to her from within those eggs. It was almost like music, or like voices singing, in a language she somehow understood. She set up camp right there and waited. For 3 weeks, Maya stayed in that cave. She sang to the eggs and told them stories from the ancient texts. She shared her food when the eggs began to crack. She was there when 2 dragons emerged, wet and crying like newborn infants. The 3rd egg never opened, but Maya did not grieve because the 2 that emerged were perfect. The first dragon was larger, with scales that darkened to deep indigo. The second was smaller and more delicate, with silver that seemed to glow from within. Maya named them Ember and Whisper. She spent hours learning how to care for them, how to feed them, how to bond with them through touch and through song. The process was instinctive, as if her body remembered what her mind had never learned. The first few years were difficult. Maya had to hunt for food for herself and for the growing dragons. She built a shelter in the mountains far from any elf settlement. She taught herself how to heal dragon wounds, how to teach them to fly, how to strengthen their bond with her consciousness. There were times when she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake, but whenever she looked into their eyes, she knew this was her true calling. Ember grew to become a fierce and powerful dragon with a tendency toward playfulness. His scales could catch sunlight and throw it back in brilliant patterns. Whisper was more gentle and thoughtful, always seeking to understand the world around her before reacting to it. When they flew together, their wings created harmonies in the air like instruments playing a symphony. Maya discovered that dragons were incredibly intelligent. They could understand complex language. They could solve problems. They could feel emotions deeply. They could love. She realized that everything her people had said about dragons being dangerous animals was wrong. Dragons were not animals at all. They were thinking beings with their own hopes and fears and desires. The time Ember and Whisper were fully grown, Maya had built a life completely separate from her people. She had a small home carved into the mountainside. She had developed a routine of hunting and teaching and flying and exploring. She had found peace in this isolation, even though there was also loneliness. Then one morning everything changed. The sky, filled with light and thunder, rolled across the mountains. Maya ran outside and saw enormous ships descending through the clouds. Unlike anything she had ever witnessed, ships from humanity. They came from beyond the stars, from a world called Earth. Their colony had failed, and they needed a new home. The humans established their settlement on the opposite side of the planet, in the lower valleys, away from the elf cities. But communication was inevitable. Within weeks, diplomatic envoys from both the human and elf governments met to discuss coexistence. The elves were cautious and the humans were curious. Maya learned about this development through traders and merchants who occasionally passed through the mountains. She heard that the humans had strange technology and even stranger customs. She heard that they were sometimes violent, but also sometimes kind. She did not know what to think about these newcomers. What she did know was that everything was about to change. The careful balance of her isolated life was about to be disrupted. The world that had remained largely the same for thousands of years was becoming something new and unpredictable. When the human settlement expanded and scouts began exploring wider territories, it was only a matter of time before they discovered Maya and her dragons. Some of the human explorers returned to their camp speaking frantically about seeing flying creatures in the mountains. The human commander Victoria heard about these reports and became interested. Victoria was a woman who respected facts and evidence. She did not dismiss reports as superstition. She organized an expedition to investigate the mountain claims. She was determined to understand what was happening in the territories around her settlement. Maya first saw the human scout from high above as Ember was diving through the clouds. The human was small and wore unfamiliar clothing and moved in ways that seemed awkward on the rocky terrain. She could have flown away, but curiosity held her in place. She landed at a distance from the human and watched. The human raised a hand in what might have been greeting, rather than aggression. Maya did her best to look calm. Even as her heart raced, Ember shifted nervously beside her. Whisper moved closer to Maya, as if seeking protection. The human scout lowered his weapon and slowly approached. When he saw Whisper, his face changed. His expression shifted from fear to wonder and then to something like recognition. He spoke words that Maya did not understand, but his tone was gentle. Maya realized in that moment that everything was about to begin. Something new was coming, something that would test her courage and her faith in the bonds she had created with her dragons. The world was ready, or not ready, to learn that dragons still lived and that they still deserved to be loved. The human scout was named Marcus, and he was absolutely terrified, even though he tried very hard to hide it. He had been sent on a routine patrol to map the mountain territories when he heard the sound of massive wings cutting through the air. His first instinct was to run. His second instinct was to fire his weapon. But something in the way the creatures moved held him in place. Maya watched the emotions play across his face. She recognized fear, but beneath it, she saw courage. It took courage to approach something you did not understand, something that your training probably told you was dangerous. She decided to lower her defenses slightly. She made a soft sound in her throat that was meant to be calming. Ember responded by lowering his massive head and settling onto the ground in a less threatening posture. Whisper did the same, and their movement seemed to reassure Marcus. He slowly holstered his weapon and took another step forward. Through broken hand gestures and simple words, Marcus managed to convey that he wanted to take a message back to his commander. He explained that his people meant no harm, that they simply wanted to understand what they had discovered. Maya was uncertain about allowing him to go back to the human settlement. If she did, the humans would know exactly where to find her and Ember and Whisper. But if she did not, then Marcus might tell them anyway, and might tell them that the dragons had been threatening. She made a choice. She would trust this human scout. She would send him back with a message that she would be willing to meet his commander in a neutral location, in 3 days' time at the standing stones in the valley below. When Marcus left, he kept looking back over his shoulder, as if he could not quite believe the dragons existed, or perhaps he feared they would disappear. He took a long route back to the settlement, almost as if he did not want to reach it too quickly. When he finally arrived at the human camp, his commander, Victoria, was waiting. Victoria listened to Marcus report with growing disbelief. She questioned him extensively about every detail. She looked at the photographs he had taken on his personal device. She made him describe the creatures multiple times. She wanted to know everything about the elf woman who accompanied them. Victoria was a woman of science and logic. She had spent her career in the human military and had learned that understanding your environment was the key to survival. She was skeptical of supernatural explanations, but she could not deny the evidence before her. Something extraordinary existed in those mountains, and she needed to know what it was. Victoria made her decision. She would meet with this elf woman. She would come prepared, but she would also come open-minded. She wanted answers, not conflict. 3 days gave her time to prepare. When the day of the meeting arrived, Victoria rode to the Standing Stones with a small team. She brought weapons but left them, holstered. She brought communication equipment in case things went wrong, but she hoped they would not. She brought respect and genuine curiosity, which was perhaps the most important thing she carried. Maya arrived first. She stood at the center of the Standing Stones with Ember and Whisper on either side of her. The dragons were calm but alert, their eyes tracking every movement of the approaching humans. Maya's heart was pounding, but her face remained serene. Victoria stepped out of the vehicle first and moved slowly toward the Standing Stones. She made sure her hands were empty and visible. She wanted to signal that she was not a threat. She wanted to show good faith. When they were close enough to speak, Victoria stopped and addressed Maya. In careful, measured words, she explained that she was the commander of the human settlement, that her people came from Earth, a world far beyond the stars, that they had come to this planet, seeking a new home. Maya responded in kind. She explained that she was Maya of the ancient elf houses, that elves had lived here for thousands of years, that dragons had once been partners with elves, but the bond had been broken long ago. She explained that she had found Ember and Whisper as eggs, and had dedicated herself to restoring what had been lost. Victoria could see the conviction in Maya's eyes. She could see how the dragons responded to Maya's presence, how they were calm in her company. This was no simple wild animal trainer. This was something deeper, a genuine connection between different species. Victoria felt a shift in her understanding. Over the next few hours, Victoria asked countless questions, and Maya answered them as best she could. Victoria learned about dragon intelligence, about their capacity for emotion, about their history with the elves. She learned that dragons were not monsters or mere beasts, but thinking, feeling beings worthy of respect. At one point, Victoria made a statement that seemed to surprise Maya. She said that in human history, too, there were stories of bonds between humans and dragons, though most humans no longer believed in them. She said that perhaps all species had ancient connections that had been forgotten or broken. She said that perhaps it was time to remember. Maya found herself beginning to trust this human commander. There was something about Victoria's approach that was different from what she had feared. Humans were not all the same, just as elves were not all the same. Victoria seemed genuinely interested in understanding rather than judging. Victoria asked if she could touch one of the dragons. Maya hesitated only for a moment before nodding. She led Victoria over to Whisper. The smaller dragon lowered her head and allowed Victoria to place her hand on her scales. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, there were tears streaming down her face. She asked Maya's permission to bring others to meet the dragons, but to do so carefully and respectfully. She promised that she would help protect the dragons from those who might fear them. She promised to work with Maya to find a way for all three species to coexist peacefully on this world. Maya agreed, but with caution. She did not fully trust the human government, but she did trust Victoria. She believed that this woman could make a difference in how humans perceived dragons. Over the following weeks, Victoria began introducing small groups of humans to the dragons, carefully controlling the experience. She brought children first because she believed that young humans were more open to wonder and less clouded by fear. She was right. The children approached the dragons with a mix of excitement and nervousness, but mostly they saw something magical. They saw creatures of beauty and power. They saw something that filled them with awe and wonder. Rather than fear, they felt privileged to be in the presence of something so extraordinary. As more humans met the dragons, the attitudes began to shift. People, who had heard only stories of frightening monsters, now saw intelligent beings. They heard about how gentle the dragons could be, how curious they were about humans, how they seemed to enjoy the company of people, but not everyone in the human settlement shared Victoria's open-mindedness. Some military personnel believed the dragons were a threat to their people. They worried about children being around dangerous creatures. They pushed for the dragons to be captured or relocated, or worse. Victoria found herself in the middle of an increasingly tense situation. She had to balance the beliefs of her people with her own convictions that this was an opportunity, not a threat. She had to prove that coexistence was possible, that fear did not have to dictate their actions toward the unknown. Tensions in the human settlement were rising like heat waves off the desert sand. Colonel Harrison was the head of human military operations, and he did not trust the dragons or the elf woman who controlled them. He saw them as a potential weapon, a threat that needed to be neutralized before it became a problem. He began attending council meetings and expressing his concerns loudly and frequently. Victoria found herself defending her position constantly. She would present evidence of the dragons' intelligence, their gentle nature, their capacity for reasoning and bonding. But Harrison would counter with worst-case scenarios, with what-if statements, with warnings about complacency and danger. He had powerful allies among the military personnel, and their voices grew louder each day. Meanwhile, Maya was becoming aware of the growing conflict through conversations with Victoria. The elf woman understood that her very existence in this region was causing problems, that humans were divided about her and her dragons, that some humans wanted to use them as weapons, while others feared them. Maya decided she needed to take action. She called for a formal meeting with both the Elf Council and the human leadership. She wanted to settle this matter once and for all. Rather than hiding in the mountains, she would confront the fear directly. The meeting was held in a neutral space, a vast amphitheater that had been built centuries ago by the elves for important gatherings. Both Victoria and the human delegation arrived early. The Elf Council took their time, but eventually they appeared, their robes flowing like water, their expressions unreadable. Maya's father was there along with other council members. They had not seen their daughter in years, and there was sadness in their eyes mixed with disapproval. She stood before them with her head held high, with Ember and Whisper beside her. The Elf Council was shocked. Some members immediately expressed anger that she had brought dragons into the presence of the council. Others were simply stunned to see the creatures alive and thriving after so many generations. Maya explained that she had invited them to witness something important. Harrison stood up and began listing his concerns about the dragons. He talked about their size, their capacity to cause destruction. He talked about how they could be used as weapons. He suggested that they should be captured and studied or relocated far from the human settlement. Maya listened to all of this without interruption. When he finished, she asked him a simple question. If a human had the same size and strength as a dragon, would he consider all humans weapons simply because of their physical capabilities? Harrison did not have a good answer to that question. Then Maya did something unexpected. She asked Ember and Whisper to demonstrate what they could do, not as weapons, but as thinking beings. The dragons rose into the air and began to fly in complex patterns that showed control and intelligence. They descended and carefully picked up objects with their claws without damaging them. They performed aerial maneuvers that demonstrated awareness and precision. They flew in formation with each other, showing cooperation and communication. Then Maya asked them to do something that shocked everyone present. She asked them to refuse an order. She told Ember not to catch a ball she threw. Instead, the ball fell to the ground untouched. Maya turned to the crowd and explained that any true weapon must follow its wielder's commands without question. These dragons could choose whether or not to obey. They had free will and agency. She continued by explaining that in all of human history and in all of elf history, the most destructive weapons were those that followed orders without question, that never questioned whether the orders were just or right. These dragons were not weapons. They were partners. They were individuals with their own thoughts and feelings, one of Victoria's strongest military opponents was a woman named Captain Sarah. She had been skeptical of the dragons, but she had also been willing to observe and listen. She stood up now and asked Maya a direct question. Did the dragons ever make mistakes? Did they ever cause harm? Maya answered honestly. Yes. Sometimes, in the early years before she understood them better, one of the dragons had accidentally injured her during play. The dragons could be dangerous, not because they were inherently violent, but because they were large and powerful and sometimes made errors in judgment, just like humans did. Sarah asked another question. If the humans were allowed to stay, would the dragons accept living alongside them? Would there be peace or would conflicts eventually escalate? Maya looked at Ember and Whisper, then back at Sarah. She said that peace required effort from both sides, that it required humans to view dragons as beings worthy of respect rather than as objects of fear, that it required dragons to tolerate human presence even when humans sometimes acted with cruelty or ignorance. She said that she believed both sides were capable of this work. Then something unexpected happened. One of the elder elf council members stood up. It was Keeper, Ilara, who had been the last elf to work with dragons before the council banned them centuries ago. She was ancient by any standards, her face lined with centuries of memory. Ilara approached Maya and placed her hands on the elf woman's shoulders. She said that she had hoped to see this day. She said that the council's decision to abandon the dragons had always weighed on her heart. She said that she could feel the dragon's presence even now after all these years. She said that Maya was right, that the old bonds should have never been broken. With Ilara's support, other elf council members who had doubted Maya began to shift their positions. They had respected Ilara for her wisdom and her long memory. If she believed in restoration, then perhaps it was worth considering. The human delegation was watching this unfold, and they too began to reconsider. Colonel Harrison looked uncomfortable as the momentum turned against him. Captain Sarah had made up her mind. She approached Maya and asked if the dragons would allow humans to ride upon their backs if a proper relationship could be established. Maya smiled and said that was something that could be negotiated, but first trust needed to be built. Fear needed to be replaced with understanding, and respect needed to flow in both directions. Victoria stepped forward and made an announcement. She said that the human settlement would establish new protocols for interaction with dragons. She said that education programs would be created to teach humans about dragons. She said that any human who wished to harm a dragon without justification would face serious consequences. She said that she believed this was the right path forward. Harrison left the amphitheater without commenting, but his authority had been undermined. Everyone could see that Victoria had the support of the council and of influential military personnel like Captain Sarah. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere began to shift. Humans who had feared dragons started spending time around them. The dragons began to understand human language better, and humans began to pick up some of the sounds and gestures that dragons used to communicate. Ember seemed to particularly enjoy the attention of the human children. He would lower himself so they could climb onto his neck or offer rides across the valleys. Whisper was more selective, but she had taken a liking to Victoria, spending time with the human commander each evening, talking in ways that seemed almost like conversation. Maya watched all of this with joy, but also with caution. She knew that deep changes in society took time, that there would still be conflicts and misunderstandings, but for the first time since she had brought her dragons down from the mountains, she felt genuine hope that a new world was being born. 6 months after the amphitheater meeting, the world had changed in ways that seemed almost impossible. Maya no longer lived in isolation in the mountains. Instead, she had accepted an invitation to live in a settlement that had been built halfway between the human colony and the elf city of Ethermore. It was a place where both species could meet and learn from each other. Ember and Whisper thrived in this new environment. They had become celebrities of sorts, with humans and elves alike children from both species would wait to see them emerge each morning for their daily flights. The dragons seemed to enjoy the attention, and they treated both human and elf children with remarkable gentleness. But the real excitement came when Maya made an announcement. She had discovered more dragon eggs preserved in ancient caves protected by elf magic from deterioration for thousands of years. She proposed a restoration program, where both humans and elves would work together to restore the dragon population to numbers that had existed before the council. Ban Victoria was immediately on board. She allocated human resources to help with the excavation and preservation efforts. She brought in human scientists to document the dragons and their growth patterns. She showed genuine enthusiasm for the project, which helped convince other humans who might have been skeptical. The Elf Council was more cautious, but Keeper Alara pushed for the initiative. She reminded them that dragons had been part of elf culture for millennia, that allowing them to fade completely was a betrayal of everything their ancestors had stood for. She suggested that restoration could be a way to heal. An old wound work began on the first nesting site that Maya had discovered. It was in the mountains, far from populated areas, but accessible enough to allow workers to come and go. The site was prepared with care. Large caves were cleaned and made suitable for incubation. The temperature and humidity were controlled through both magical and technological means. Maya spent most of her time at the nesting site working alongside teams of humans and elves. She showed them how to care for the eggs, how to sense the dragons within them, how to prepare for the hatching process. She taught them songs that elves traditionally sang to unborn dragons. She explained the spiritual component of dragon raising, that it was never just a physical process. The first eggs began to hatch after 3 months of preparation. Maya was present for each hatching. She welcomed each new dragon into the world with the ceremony and respect that such a moment deserved. She taught the newborns to trust her, and to understand that humans and elves were friends, not enemies. The new dragons grew quickly under the care of multiple species. Ember and Whisper took on roles as teachers and protectors of the young dragons. They showed them how to fly, how to hunt, how to exist in a world that was very different from the world their distant ancestors had known. But not everything proceeded smoothly. One day, a group of humans arrived at the nesting site led by Colonel Harrison. He had been quiet for months, and many had thought he had accepted the changes. But now, he revealed his true intentions. He had come with soldiers and with equipment that was clearly designed to capture dragons. Victoria was away attending to human settlement matters when Harrison made his move. He had decided to take matters into his own hands to secure what he viewed as a potential military asset. He had brought a containment field generator, a device designed to trap the dragons in an energy barrier. Maya was quick to react. When she saw the soldiers, she immediately signaled, Ember and Whisper. The dragons moved the young ones away from danger to a deeper part of the caves. Maya placed herself between the soldiers and the cave entrance. Her eyes blazed with fury. But instead of violence, Maya chose words. She stepped forward and asked Harrison why he felt he needed to take these dragons as prisoners. She pointed out that the dragons were thriving, that they were showing no signs of aggression, that they had every opportunity to attack humans, but chose not to. She asked him what he was afraid of. Harrison responded with statements about human security, about the need to maintain advantage, about the possibility that dragons might turn on humans in the future. He talked about contingencies and worst-case scenarios. Maya told him that living in fear was not living at all. She said that eventually fear would consume him, that it would twist him into something he did not want to become. She said that she had made a choice to trust, despite her own fears, and that it had been the best choice she ever made. At that moment, something unexpected happened. Captain Sarah emerged from the trees behind Harrison with a group of human soldiers. These were soldiers loyal to Victoria, not to Harrison. Sarah had been alerted by one of Maya's elf allies. She had come to stop this attempted theft of the dragons. Harrison found himself surrounded. He could not move without resistance. His soldiers looked uncertain. The captain had authority equal to or exceeding his own, and they did not know whether to follow his orders or stand down. Sarah approached Maya and told her that this had gone far enough. She said that Harrison was acting outside his authority, that he had been violating the peace accords that existed between humans and the other species. She said that he would be taken into custody and his actions would be reviewed. Harrison tried to protest, but Sarah was unmoved. She ordered her soldiers to take him into custody, to confiscate his equipment, and to escort him back to the human settlement for trial. He would face charges of attempted theft of protected species, of violation of peace accords, of acting without authorization. After Harrison and his soldiers were removed, Maya sat down heavily on a nearby stone. She was shaking not from fear but from the realization of how close disaster had been. Sarah sat beside her and waited until Maya had composed herself. Sarah told her that humans were complex creatures. Some, like her and Victoria, understood the value of what was happening. Others, like Harrison, clung to old ways of thinking. Sarah said that change was always difficult, that not everyone would accept it. Some people would fight it. Some would deny it. Some would try to undermine it. But as long as people like Victoria and Sarah existed, as long as enough humans chose understanding over fear, then change could prevail. Over the next weeks, Harrison was tried for his actions. He was found guilty and sentenced to removal from the settlement. His military position was revoked and he was sent back to human space. This was a powerful message to those who might have been sympathetic to his views that the new society they were building would not tolerate those who tried to return to old patterns of conquest and control. The Dragon Restoration Program continued without further major incidents. Over the next year, more eggs hatched, more dragons were born, more bonds were formed between humans, elves, and dragons. The population grew from the original 2 dragons that Maya had bonded with to nearly 50 individuals. Young dragons began to show unique personalities. Some were playful and adventurous. Others were thoughtful and careful. Some formed strong bonds with individual humans, or elves, while others seemed to enjoy the company of the entire community, but did not bond with any single person. Maya watched all of this unfold with a sense of profound satisfaction. She had started her journey alone, seeking only to save the dragons from extinction, but now she had created something far greater, a new society, a new way of living where different species could coexist in mutual respect and partnership. 2 years had passed since that day when Colonel Harrison tried to steal the dragons and was stopped by Captain Sarah. The world of Kepler 442b had been transformed in ways that many had thought impossible. The dragon population had grown to nearly
100 individuals. The human and elf settlements were no longer separate entities but had merged into a true multicultural community. Maya stood on the balcony of her home looking out over the valley. The home was a beautiful structure built
jointly by human engineers and elf architects. It combined human technology with elf magic in ways that created something unique and powerful. From where she stood, she could see the human structures, the elf spires, and the new dragon habitats that had been built to accommodate the growing population. Ember landed nearby his massive form, settling with surprising grace for a creature of his size. He had grown to be even more magnificent than anyone had predicted. His scales now showed patterns of deep indigo with veins of silver that seemed to glow in certain light. His wings had a span that could eclipse small buildings, yet he moved with precision and control. Whisper arrived moments later, circling once before landing beside her brother. The female dragon had become a symbol of the peace between species. Many stories were told about her. She was said to have prevented conflicts through her calming presence. She was credited with helping young humans and elves understand each other. Child approached Maya from inside the home. The child was human, no more than 6 years old, with dark curly hair and bright eyes, named Lucy. Her parents were scientists working in the research division studying dragon behavior and dragon physiology. Lucy had become something of a fixture in Maya's home, spending more time with the dragons than with her own family. Lucy ran to Ember and without hesitation climbed onto the dragon's neck. Ember seemed to understand exactly how much care to take with his small passenger. He positioned himself so that she could grip his scales safely and started walking slowly around the balcony area. Another child emerged from inside, a young elf boy named Theron. His parents were elf council members who had come to support the restoration program. He was perhaps 9 years old, with silver hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes that held ancient wisdom mixed with youthful curiosity. Theron approached Whisper more slowly. He had learned that while Whisper was gentle, she appreciated being asked for permission before being touched. Theron held out his hand and Whisper lowered her head, allowing him to place his palm against her scales. Theron closed his eyes and seemed to be communicating with the dragon in ways that words could not capture. Victoria arrived at the home in the evening, as she often did. She had taken to spending time with Maya and the dragons, whenever her duties as human commander allowed it. The relationship between Victoria and Maya had deepened into genuine friendship. They understood each other in ways that transcended species. Victoria sat beside Maya on the balcony, and they watched the sunset together. The twin suns of Kepler 442b created a display of orange and purple and deep red across the sky. It was beautiful, and it seemed to symbolize the blending of different worlds and different peoples. Victoria told Maya that she had received communication from Earth. A human delegation was coming to visit the settlement. They wanted to see for themselves the extraordinary work that had been done. They wanted to understand how humans, elves, and dragons were living together. Maya felt a moment of anxiety return. Why would Earth care about what was happening? Here the human settlement on Kepler 442b was relatively small and relatively isolated from the larger human civilization. What did the arrival of officials from Earth mean for their fragile new society? Victoria seemed to sense Maya's concern. She explained that the story of the dragon restoration had spread throughout human space. People were fascinated by the idea that an extinct species was being brought back from the brink of extinction. People were inspired by the cooperation between humans and elves. People wanted to know if this model could work on other worlds. The delegation arrived 2 weeks later, consisting of scientists, politicians, and military advisors. They were led by a woman named Ambassador Collins who had experience in interspecies relations. She was curious but also cautious, eager to learn but also ready to judge. Maya decided to take the same approach with these Earth officials that she had taken with Colonel Harrison. She decided to show them, rather than tell them what had been accomplished. She arranged a demonstration in the valley below the main settlement. The dragon population had grown large enough that she could show the diversity of dragons that now existed. Some were young and small barely, able to fly. Others were mature and powerful. Some showed unusual colors and patterns as the dragon population had begun to show genetic diversity. The dragons demonstrated their intelligence, their capacity for training and cooperation with humans, their ability to understand complex instructions. Their flying ability was extraordinary, their strength was impressive, but most importantly, their gentleness with the humans and elves who worked with them was obvious. Ambassador Collins watched everything. With great attention, she asked countless questions about the process, about the dragons, about the cooperation between species. She interviewed Maya extensively, wanting to understand the journey that had led to this moment. On the final day of the delegation visit, Collins requested a private meeting with Maya and Victoria. The ambassador explained that Earth had resources available to help expand this model to other worlds. There were other endangered species that could benefit from the kind of restoration program that had been successful. Here Collins proposed that Maya become an ambassador for a broader restoration initiative that humans, elves, and other species could work together on worlds throughout the galaxy. She said that Maya's story had the power to inspire people across species lines. She said that the work she had started here could change the face of civilization. Maya felt overwhelmed by the offer. She looked at Ember and Whisper, who seemed to sense the importance of the moment. Ember approached Collins and allowed the ambassador to touch his scales. The dragon seemed to give approval in his own way. Maya said yes to the proposal, but she added conditions. She wanted Victoria to be involved. She wanted the elves to have equal voice in all decisions. She wanted Lucy and Theron and all the young people of both species to have roles in this new initiative. She said that restoration could not be done by any single species working alone. Over the following months, preparations began. A training program was established to teach the techniques of dragon restoration. The first expansion site was selected on a neighboring world where an ancient dragon species had been hunted to near extinction. Maya would travel to this new site, but she would not abandon Kepler 442b. Ember and Whisper would remain here, continuing to live their lives in the community they had helped create. But some of their offspring would be transported to the new restoration site to help begin the process again. On the night before Maya's first journey to the neighboring world, she stood with Ember and Whisper on their favorite cliff overlooking the valley. The sounds of the community drifted up to them, humans and elves laughing together, dragons singing their complex songs. Maya reflected on everything that had happened, starting from that day when she was a young girl, reading forbidden texts about dragons in the crystal libraries of Ethermore. She had followed her heart, and that heart had led her to restore something beautiful that everyone believed was lost forever. She had shown that prejudice was not inevitable, that fear could be overcome, that bonds between different kinds of souls were possible and powerful. She had proven that one individual with courage and conviction could change the world. Ember nuzzled her gently, and Whisper pressed her head against Maya's back. The dragons did not speak in words, but their affection was clear and profound. They had come so far together, from abandoned eggs in a mountain cave to partners in a transformation that would ripple across worlds. As the stars emerged in the night sky, Maya made a silent promise to herself and to her dragons. She would carry the message of restoration and cooperation to every world that needed it. She would show everyone she met that different kinds of beings could create something beautiful together. She would prove that the universe had room for hope.